Good morning. Welcome to session 13 of Get Wise. Today we're going to be looking at chapter 11 of the book of Proverbs. So once again, I say this every time, but if this is your first time tuning in with us, go back to our very first time where we start in chapter 1. You're welcome to watch this video and see what's going on, but really as you go through this full book, I think you'll get a fuller glimpse of what's going on in the passage that we're talking about today when you see everything that's happened before. And specifically today's passage in chapter 11, because it kind of takes place in this middle of 5 chapters that kind of all go in the same thought pattern. And so they all fit together in this wisdom knowledge that's being thrown out. And so King Solomon's just thrown out truth bombs back and forth. So to really get a better glimpse of today's chapter, I'd highly recommend taking a look at chapter 10. Rachel talked that yesterday. And so that will just give you a fuller glimpse of today's passage. But before we jump in, I want you to, in your mind right now, to think through when was a time that you had this moment of pride and it backfired on you. So to give you a story in my life, I'm a very competitive person. That's something that I have always been. And so I was with one of my friends and we were biking. And we were going down this major road in Portland. And my friend was a block ahead of me at the time. And so in my mind, I was like, all right, I can catch him. And I saw this corner that I could take that allowed me to pass him and get in front of him. I was like, haha, I'm going to beat him. Well, in that moment, as I sped up to pass him, my bike, as I accelerated hard on the pedals, my wheel came out of the frame and jammed up into the frame and flipped me over the top of it on this really busy road in downtown Portland. And I went right over the handlebars and skidded for a while. And as I look back on that time, I saw where, man, my pride of I can win, I can be faster, I'm going to beat him, heavily backfired because I landed up on my butt on the street. And so that's just one of the moments that I can think of. So I want you to go ahead and pause this video and think back through your life. When was a time that a moment of pride led to downfall or problematic, or you might have been like me where you landed on your butt? So go ahead and pause the video for a second and think through that. All right, welcome back. So as you think about that moment, verse 2, I think really explains this. And it says, when pride comes, then comes disgrace. But with the humble is wisdom. It's really interesting that anytime pride comes up, it tends to lead to pride being destroyed, which leads us to being humble. So the more prideful we are, the more we have to be knocked down, until eventually we get to this point of realizing, man, humbleness is the way to go. So I want you to go ahead and pause this video and read through all of chapter 11. It is, 31 verses. So go ahead and take a look at the 31 verses, and then come back. So we're going to go ahead and pause. All right, so as we look through these first 14 verses, what I want you to do is pause this video and reread those 14 verses. So starting in verse 1, and I want you to try to pick out 3 different things. One, before we jump into this, in these first 14 verses, but honestly through this whole chapter, and through this section, we're seeing this comparison of the foolish man versus the righteous man. And so I just kind of wanted to define this term. So the righteous man, according to Google, whatever, I looked it up, is somebody that is morally right or justifiable. And so it's this idea of somebody that is right before God. Justified is just as if you've never sinned or just as if you've never done anything wrong. So a righteous man is somebody that is morally doing the right thing. The foolish man is somebody that is lacking good sense or judgment or is unwise, is the definition of foolish. And so with those definitions in mind, we're seeing these 2 comparisons between the foolish man and the righteous man. So going through, I want you to pick out 3 comparisons of this foolish man versus the righteous man and see what is this telling us about God in the afterlife first. Secondly, what about our community around this wise man and righteous? How do they interact with the foolish man and the righteous man? And then finally, how does this impact the foolish man and the righteous man? And so finding, like in those three comparisons, God, the community around them, and then themselves, what does this tell us about the righteous man and the foolish man? So go ahead and pause the video, read through verse 14, and look for those three things. Awesome. Welcome back. I hope you found those three examples. Once again, of the comparison between the righteous man and the foolish man and how we interact with God / the afterlife, with our community around us, and with ourselves. So next, what we're going to look at is verses 15 to the end to verse 31. And I want you to go ahead and pause the video, read through these last 16 verses, and I want you to pick out what are your favorite comparisons. There's a lot of good imagery that we've seen all through Proverbs, but we're going to continue seeing it here. So which of these comparisons strike you as, man, this makes a lot of sense, I've seen this, or man, this one just makes me laugh, or I enjoy this. But go ahead and read through these last 16 verses and look for 2 or 3 that really stick out to you. So go ahead and pause the video and look for that. Awesome. Welcome back. So a couple questions I want you, after having read this full chapter, we see in verse 14, it says this: when there is no Verse 14 says, where there is no guidance, a people falls, but in an abundance of counselors, there is safety. So I want you to go ahead and pause this video and think through this question of when in your life have you had guidance? How has that gone well? Maybe even when has that gone bad? And when in your life have you had no guidance, and what happened? Did that go good or bad? And I think as you think through, was there abundance of counselors, and who were they? Were they wise counselors, or were they not? Because we see something that Solomon also talks about is, who is your counselor? Are they just yes people that will tell you yes to whatever you want to do? So it's like, hey, I want to go buy this. Are they going to just tell you yes, or are they going to tell you no? So take some time and think through, who are your counselors, and how has that impacted your life? Awesome. Welcome back. So now, kind of final question I want to leave you with is in verse 30. It says this: the fruit of the righteousness is a tree of life, and whoever captures souls is wise. If the righteous is repaid on earth, how much more the wicked and the sinner? So that's verse 30 and 31. So as we see this, I think this is really amazing, because it says the fruit of righteousness is a tree of life. So as we look at what is righteousness, going back from chapter 1, we saw wisdom is the fear of the Lord. So is the beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord. And so we see here that the fruit of righteousness is a tree of life. So once again, we see that to be wise is to know the Lord and to follow Him, to fear Him. But then we also see righteousness is a tree of life. And so we see that to be righteous is to know God and to be with God. And then it's a second verse of whoever captures souls is wise. I mean, you're like, what is this talking about? How do we capture souls? I think this is important, that as we seek the Lord and know Him, the byproduct of this is that we want to tell people about God. And then they come to know Him as well. And so my final questions I want you to think about is, one, are you a tree of life? Is your fruit of righteousness the tree of life? Do you know God? Secondly, talking about verse 31, are your behavior, are you righteous, or do you tend to be more wicked? And that word's kind of weird, but I think it's really interesting, because the foolish man tends to do more wicked things. And so as you look at, are you the wicked person, or the foolish man, or are you the wise man, the righteous man? And so look through and see, if you look through your whole life, what of those categories would you fall in? And then finally, do you have counselors in your life that are giving you good advice. So go ahead and think through those 3 questions. Once again, the first one is the fruit of your righteousness a tree of life? Do you have that relationship with God? Secondly, are you a foolish man, or are you a righteous, wise man? And then finally, do you have good counselors, and what does that look like? So thanks. Hopefully see you tomorrow.